Sometimes it feels like the conversations being had across the media space are the wrong ones. Well, maybe not exactly wrong. Perhaps what I mean to say is that they are often overly simplistic. In our current media landscape, there's an insatiable appetite for content, and the content that performs best is often reduced to the form that best sparks outrage or can be co-opted to illustrate some preconceived position or belief. Let's take something very current. The Oceanwide Plaza in downtown LA over the last couple of months has gotten covered in graffiti from top to bottom. Over the course of just one weekend, hundreds of writers were painting the building inside and out, and some people even base jumped off the roof. On multiple evenings, the police surrounded the building, flew choppers with spotlights around it, and made a couple of arrests, but for the most part, didn't do much. Social media and even a number of legacy news media sites were awash with headlines that either took the position that it was LA's hottest new art installation or a symbol that the city had lost control. Regardless, for anyone that knows LA's graffiti history, it's mostly been a city with an oppressive and incredibly punitive attitude towards it, and that also adds another weird dimension to this moment. Of course, the graffiti is, as always, only a symptom of deeper societal issues. The development has loomed unfinished over the downtown skyline for 5 years, halted amidst a scandal involving bribery of local officials and rising geopolitical tensions between China and the US due to their ongoing trade dispute. When I see situations like these arise, and this is likely a bias of my own, but I see optimism at play. I see signs of life. I see young people saying, "Hey, I'm here, and if you don't care about this space, I will." I know that's contrary to how a lot of people view graffiti, but I've always seen it as a part of the cycle of the urban environment. It thrives and grows in places of neglect. I can't help but think back to a city dear to my heart, Detroit, Michigan, home of today's guest, Bakpak Durden. Back in 2010, Detroit was the focus of a lot of media. As the city was hurtling towards bankruptcy, it was descended upon by graffiti writers and muralists from all over the world. I was one of those people because my good friend Jason Revoke moved out there, and I made a point of visiting the city almost yearly over the next decade. I won't lie. The initial allure for me was fairly superficial, as there was a lot of abandoned space to paint and explore. With each visit though, I was exposed to more people, especially local artists with deep connections to the city. I started to hear more perspectives, differing points of view about Detroit, its history, and the ways it was changing. What I started to appreciate above all else was the complexity of it all. That the sense of optimism, freedom, and creative ingenuity you could feel in the city was also born from so much hardship and loss. The overwhelming lesson I learned was that no community is monolithic. Within a city or its neighborhoods are a multitude of communities. Detroit began to serve as a reminder to me to not take anything at face value, that there are layers and layers of history at play, and you need to stay open to that if you're working out in the streets. Bakpak Durden is a highly skilled artist I met during my last few visits to the city and have followed their journey into the large mural realm with excitement. Firstly, beyond the fact that their murals are meticulously rendered in a way similar to their oil-painted studio work, the thing I've always been struck by is how deeply conceptual these works are. I think this is something that's always served as a key difference in how these murals look amongst many others painted in a festival context. They're dark, introspective, they feel incredibly personal, like I'm being invited in to consider something about the artist and their journey. That feels so different when a lot of murals are loud, colorful, and frankly, obvious. Welcome to Muralism, where we dig deeper into the large mural movement and have real conversations with the artists behind the work. Well, Bakpak, thank you so much for joining me today. It's a real pleasure to have you on Muralism.
Happy to be here.
Okay, so you're sitting in this very fancy gaming chair, apparently not a gamer, in your studio workspace in Detroit. And I wonder if you could kind of tell me a little bit about, because I assume you were born in Detroit, right?
Yeah, born and raised.
Wow, so a true Detroiter. And tell me a little bit about that. You know, what that experience was like growing up in that city, and kind of how that kind of led you to where you are now as an artist.
Oh boy. Well, It's complicated, but mostly it's been cool. My whole life has been cool. Uh, one part of Detroit, or one part of what Detroit is known for, is the arts as a whole, and how kind of really good we are about it, but also low key. Like
Mm.
everyone's an artist, even blue collar people, because we're a very blue collar city. In fact, most people moved here to work in the auto industry. So the prevalence of art within community and family is kind of a constant, but for it to reach heights of, I don't know, elite was not something discussed or talked about, or I don't know the word, like,
Do you think that's something that comes with having a blue collar attitude? Because I relate somewhat coming from, like from where I came from in my city. The neighborhood I grew up in was like the last kind of inner city area with factories and industry. And the
yeah,
majority of my friends that I grew up with were, their parents had immigrated and worked those kind of jobs, like factory jobs and labor jobs and stuff. And if you were creative, there was still a sense that it was something very practical that you do with your hands that you make that's not like part of this kind of elite kind of thing, like, where art kind of goes into this other space where it's very like, I don't know, people like to intellectualize about it, whereas like me and my friends were talking a very kind of down to earth way about it.
yeah, I think it is, but everything that comes with being blue collar, um, which, like you said, the immigrantness of it, and migrations that are tied with job security.
Mm.
So if you're moving your whole family, building a house, and you have to sustain this household, it doesn't make feasible sense to not work, because art is not something that you can make money off of in theory, until it is. But you know what I mean?
Yeah. For the vast majority of people, it isn't. It's like,
Yeah,
it's one of those things that you do and you do and you do and you do and you hone your craft and you hope that the right people pay attention and kind of open up an opportunity for you to kind of go to the next level.
yeah.
But until that point, it's just something you do.
It's just something you do, and
Yeah.
I think most movies about Motown, that's like the storyline. You know, and like, oh, this undiscovered talent. They were existing this whole time, but meanwhile, during the day, they were washing dishes, or like, you know what I mean? It's the underdog
Mm.
story, but it's also facts.
I think what's interesting about Detroit is also how many art projects out there have a really kind of practical application to them as well. Like, what's
Hmm.
the name of the recycling center that was kind of like all artist led and set up in it, have these
Yeah,
crazy parties and stuff like that? And it's like, but it was serving a very practical purpose, which is kind of providing like a service that the city was not. But at the same time, it was all run and facilitated by artists, and it was full of sculptures and all this weird shit.
yeah. Still popping off. I think they just remodeled, and it's. I haven't been back, but I heard interesting things. But yeah,
One
that's
of,
a real.
one of my favorite things was just kind of rocking up there, and there'd be a bonfire in the middle, and
Yeah,
everyone's dancing around the bonfire, and there's a freight line that runs basically right through the middle of the venue. And well, Tatiana Suarez and some others have probably got some stories about me jumping on the side of the freight train and riding it so far down the train line, thinking everybody was with me, and then realizing nobody was with me all of a sudden, having to jump off and walk about 2 hours back to the party.
bro. I mean, those full moon parties are pretty epic, and
Yeah.
just the fire that goes on, and then the added fire elements that are sculptural that people started adding to the situation. But yeah,
Yeah.
I'm not on that train. That's all you, bro.
So, okay, so well, let's bring it back a bit. Let's talk about. You mentioned that everybody's kind of an artist in a very blue collar kind of sense, and that then that kind of implies to me that you grew up with a lot of creativity around you, like family members and people who were doing stuff, not maybe not pursuing like a gallery career per se, but that was something that was encouraged and something that
Yeah,
was around you.
definitely. I don't even know how far back to go. So like
Yeah.
I just did a research thing and involved my mom and a whole bunch of other people in my family to get more research, but it was all for the a couple like a painting study. Nah, I did three pieces for the skilled labor show at Cranbrook, and I was telling the story of my great grandfather who immigrated from Barbados to Detroit for the auto industry. So he ended up working for Ford because it was like the only place black people could work. Yeah, in the States. So he moved from there, but he also had a practice of working on his car and tending a garden. He built his house. Everyone in the house also had practices that I didn't know about, but I just was around, you know? So I found out that my grand aunt was a painter. I knew my grandmother was a seamstress, and she like made clothes for dolls and custom clothes for people to go to like events shit. My mom, she went to school for I think broadcasting, so she's like into film and also is a painter. um
Wow.
yeah, I could go on, I could go on, but
So it wasn't a surprise to anybody when you started pursuing art in the way that you did.
I think no, there wasn't a surprise. I think the surprise was my um refusal to concede to job security, and
Yeah,
because
yeah,
I yeah, I don't want to work a regular job. What if I did tattoos instead? That's art. That's making money. Or I don't even remember. Oh, I was a barber for some time. I mean, I still am technically, but I also ended up getting a blue collar job to sustain. So I was like, whatever.
yeah, for sure. I mean, I always talk about it as the tipping point. You know, like you kind of like in life, you kind of do a lot of what you don't want to do, and
Mhm.
you hone and develop what you do want to do, and you just sort of hope that gradually the scales kind of weigh a bit heavily that way. Well, I guess it'd be this way to where
Yes.
you're actually doing what you want to do. I was kind of doing
Yep.
the opposite with my hands for what but you know what I mean.
I know exactly what you mean, and that's exactly what happened. I was working a secret job for like almost 10 years, and no
Mm.
one knew about. And while I was there doing my job, I was also working on art. And then after I got off of work, I would make stuff
Yeah.
until
But
I
so,
was
I mean, my introduction to you was as a muralist.
yeah.
So I have only known you since you've been painting murals, but you have this whole kind of like history of painting that kind of happens before then, is sort of honing your craft. And then, well, from my point of view, that, what I see now is like a lot of really, really meticulously rendered oil paintings that look like they take forever. So, it kind
Forever.
of, yeah. So, like, but I always assumed you had a formal kind of education in painting and everything as well. And I was kind of surprised to find out that actually you're self taught, but then you've really played the game as far as kind of like, applying for residencies and fellowships and doing all this other stuff. So, your mindset was definitely much more in the kind of formal kind of art game. Can you talk a little bit about kind of that journey? I mean, because this is just me kind of trying to patch together bits of information from what I know in our conversations.
I don't even know where to start. Maybe
Mm.
like you say extensive painting background. I don't. I mean, not that it's not extensive, but I didn't start painting like in the studio or murals until 2018. Like I started both of those at the
Wow.
same time.
Oh, you're
Yeah.
kidding me. Okay, okay, this is surprising to me because, like, when I saw your first murals, the first one that really stood out to me, and I was like, okay, Backpack has arrived. Like, I'd seen a couple, but it was the one painted during, I think it was painted during Blackout Walls, and it
Yeah.
was the one. It was a kind of a self portrait where you're kind of floating on a black
Yeah.
background with the chair and that, and I was just like, okay, this is phenomenal. Like it's a really really great mural,
but it's also it's painted by somebody that understands how to paint in a classical sense. So then I wasn't surprised when I saw the canvas work and assumed that you had had this long history prior to then.
I
So
mean,
you're
my
telling
long
me this all happened at the same time?
yes, the long
Okay.
history, like not illustration, but like draftsmanship. Like very detailed drawings that
Hmm.
took too long, honestly, and they didn't have the same depth that paintings do. But I was so resistant to painting because it felt like normal, I guess, like the
Hmm.
thing that was expected of people that are artists. Um, and then I just ended up doing it, but it happened because, like the oil painting specifically, um, my partner at the time, she was an oil painter and she offered me her paint, and that was
Right.
basically it.
So, I mean, I love that moment. For me personally, I like when you try something and it's something you're resistant to,
Yeah,
and then there's something that's sparked in you that goes, "Oh, hang on a second, I kind of am curious about this." Like where you find yourself thinking, maybe even during the evening after a session of painting, still about what you're going to do in the next session. Was that
yeah,
kind of how it was?
yep, that's exactly how it was. But like going from just drawing and doing multimedia work or whatever, where the only painting I actually was doing was background fills with gouache because I just really
Mm.
did not want to paint. I was like, what's the least painterly paint? Gouache, opaque, cool.
Mm.
Into oil painting and wanting a visual language that transferred or was like true to what I was trying to make.
Mm.
So as soon as that first paint stroke and oil happened, I started diving into how I wanted my my visual language to be without me having to talk about it. You know what I mean?
Mm.
So I wasn't
They
wasting.
they do seem very autobiographical,
Mhm.
and they seem to be really kind of sort of narrative driven. And there's a ton of, I mean, I think probably Easter eggs, like things that are like subtle references to things that maybe you know about, you
Yeah.
know. I mean, I might interpret completely differently, but I do see that. I do see that they're very story driven.
Mhm. Everything is narrative based, but like my first in like inkling into what I wanted my compositions to look like or feel like actually was Renaissance and Baroque art,
Mm.
where it is story driven. There is symbolism hidden within the thing. In most cases, it's religious iconography, where everyone knows the story, but where it's being reinterpreted in different ways. So I wanted to tell a story that I guess no one knew because I wasn't telling any parts of my story, and then I wanted everyone to be engaged with it without it being a force.
Right, right. And how do you feel like your work's being received?
Well, now I got everyone on the hook. They want to know the secrets, and they want to find like the symbols.
Mm.
And I think it's being received fairly well. Like every time I speak about it, I get better questions from viewers. And when I tell everyone that I'm a filmmaker, they're like, "Yeah, that makes sense.
Right,
Yeah,
right.
these are like cinematic." And I'm like, "Okay, cool. I don't have to like prove it anymore. I could just exist in the
Yeah.
creation."
I guess that's the thing as well, is that you have kind of about three or four different modalities that you shift between, and they're all kind of in conversation with each other, which I can relate to that. And I think it's a really healthy way to work, to be
Hmm.
honest, because it kind of reveals new possibilities that if you just kind of really kind of narrow yourself into one kind of field of working, you might not ever discover.
Right. You end up like thinking different,
Yeah.
like going from background to foreground or foreground to background, depending on whatever medium it is,
Mm.
or even moving on a different axis point or,
Yeah.
yeah, axis.
I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the mural that you did for the Cranbrook show, in relation to the sculptural piece, the sort of articulating kind of arms with all the paintings on it? Because you have broken it down to me before, and I was kind of blown away. Do you mind talking a little bit about it and what it kind of all means?
Yeah, I'll talk about it. What? As long as you put up a graphic,
Oh yeah,
because
we will. Yeah, definitely.
I'm like going to be pulling it from my head.
Mm.
So in the gallery at the museum, well, the show is called The Eye of Horus. So I created a whole experience where the viewers are coming in and experiencing a film that they didn't know anything about. I just put up vague scavenger hunt like photographs as the like marketing for the show. So everyone's coming in blind, and as soon as you walk in, you see this giant exploded skull painted on the wall. And it's a morphic piece. So as you move in the gallery, the whole mural is moving with you and skewing as you move. And so exploded skulls have 22 pieces with articulating arms, so you can see all sides of what a human skull looks like. And so I made a sculpture with the help of my fabricator friend because I didn't have the tools. So made a sculpture, and from that sculpture there were articulating arms, and from those articulating arms there are 6 inch by 6 inch panels, and there are 22 of them. And each panel had a different perspective of a still life that was the narrative driven piece that went throughout the whole of the show. Yeah, I think I touched on everything.
Yeah, I
Oh,
mean, I
oh,
think
but
it's awesome because I mean, when I had looked at it on social media and stuff prior to you explaining it to me,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
um, I kind of like, I think I got partially the way there of kind of understanding what was going on in the relationship between the two. But when you actually broke it down, I was like, damn, like that it was so specific to the fragments of the skull and all of that. And
Yeah.
how was it kind of watching people engage with that as far as like, were the people that would just suddenly get an aha moment and realize the relationship?
There are a few people who are just like so in it that they forgot to ask the question, which is even better. But there were so many things to find and narrative threads to go on that two people that went into the show at the same time would end up at very different parts of what their aha moment was, right? So the whether it was figuring out that both the sculpture and the mural related, and if you stood in one spot it all lines up, or that you're inside the brain and you didn't know that you were inside the brain the whole time, or that within every painting there's a time shift, and there's like the monochromatic thing that I do or whatever is being taken over depending on which direction you're going. So it's like everyone's figuring out something and everyone's figuring out a different thing. And that's
Mm.
probably my favorite thing about my little experiences, because then I ask everybody to write it down and submit anonymously.
Oh,
So,
really? Oh, so that was
yes,
part of the installation also. Did you keep
always.
all of those kind of submissions from people?
Yeah. Every
That's really cool.
solo exhibition I make, print media, and if you choose to engage, you can, but they're like anonymous forums. And one of my shows, I had everyone put the paintings in a narrative order and then tell a story. Another show, I had a call in line, a hotline, and you put in which numbers you press and then tell me where we're going based on the numbers that you press. And then with this one specifically, there were 3 different prompts. I don't remember them, but I know
Mm.
one of them was um, what are the senses that are being heightened or amplified when you look at these pieces, something like
Mm.
that. But it was like
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
always something where you're being disarmed and then engaged and then asked to provide feedback so you don't leave with the raw emotion.
Mm. That's really cool. I like that. Do you think that some of this kind of sort of interactivity this component of interactivity, do you think that that's part of like what appeals to you about painting murals? Like,
And
because murals are very interesting in the sense that you're out in a space and
yeah,
the interactions are varied.
yeah, they are very varied. There's the interaction is different, or when it enters the chat as opposed to with the studio work, because like studio work is very internal, introspective, in solitude. Like I don't let anyone into my studio. No one knows what I'm actually working on until it's time for me to give it to the gallery, and they're like, "Oh, okay, cool." But with murals, it's you have to send off the drawings ahead of time,
Mm,
and conversation sometimes isn't um, a verbal one in terms of figuring out who you're painting with and what
mm,
communities you're going to be in. There's a
mm,
research element that comes with that. So the interaction is before the painting, and then the painting happens, and then we interact after the fact, where everyone's like, "I didn't know about this thing. That's my culture," and I'm like, "Hell yeah, same." You know?
mm. I mean, it can be a tremendous weight on an artist. I think sometimes I definitely felt it a lot coming into communities as an outsider,
Yeah,
to do something that I know or that I felt fairly confident that I could leave and there would be a sense of peace. You know
yeah,
that what I had made wasn't something that would upset the community, which was very different from I think the mindset of where I was at as a graffiti writer, where you just don't care. You
yeah,
know, like I was sort of equated to like being a graffiti writer. It's about kind of conquering, you know, and then doing the mural work is much more in collaboration
yeah.
with the spaces you kind of go. I mean, do you feel, even as a local painting large murals in Detroit, do you feel a deep sense of responsibility to the community?
Yes, it's tough every time. Because on one hand, I'm like, I got to paint another one in Detroit. I feel like they're tired of me. But at the same time, everyone's like, thank you so much. And I'm like, okay, I guess it's fine. Um, but every community is different. So, like, I painted a fighting rooster in one
Mm.
community because there's a dense population of, like, Latinx and Hispanic folks that lived in that area.
Is that
And
in the Southwest?
yep, yep.
Yeah.
And now that's demolished, this is a whole other thing. But the point is that I'm reflecting back who's there based on how I can engage with who's there, right?
Mm.
I painted the AO. I think that's not down. It's like Midtown area of Detroit, and those are masquerade dancers that are from Nigeria. Nigeria, yes, and they do a procession, like a funerary procession, um, as a celebration, but also like the whole of the community does the thing. Anyway, so I did that research, did the thing, painted it on the side of a restaurant that serves Afro Caribbean food, and then all of the West African community that's in the area is like, yes, this is my
Mm.
culture. And I'm like,
Mm.
hell yeah, bro, this is my culture that I didn't know about. Thank you for allowing the opportunity to
Yeah.
do research. But like, it's always the conversation is there, and then the questions get asked afterward in terms of what something means instead of why did you
Mm.
subject us to this thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah. It's funny because my experiences with Detroit, we've spoken a little about it over the years. You know, they've been varied. You know,
Yeah.
my perspective of Detroit as an outsider coming in on my first visit in 2009, I came in the dead of winter. You know what I mean? And it was bleak. Like, you know, I didn't really understand like just how seasonal some of these cities in the US are that get bitterly cold
Uh
at a
huh.
certain time of year, you know. Um, and then my very next visit when I came, it was like the peak of summer. And it was like Deli in the alley and all these things going on. And it's like festivities in the street and just people everywhere. And all the businesses are bustling. And so it was such a contrast But I used to come and paint graffiti with my friends, and that was a thing that happened, in Detroit, where it's like kind of like people kind of started coming from everywhere to paint there. And I guess like, when I reflect and I look back, although it was very fun, it maybe wasn't like the most sensitive thing to do, in a lot of ways. And then, as I started to meet festival organizers and artists through those festival kind of contexts, there's like
Yeah.
another phase of Detroit where there's like a lot of outside artists coming to paint very large murals in lieu of
Mm-hmm.
the graffiti, and a very small number of Detroit artists being invited in to participate.
Mm-hmm.
And then you kind of have a later phase where people started really thinking about curating much more locally, which has kind of happened,
Yeah.
But there's all these kind of shifts, and it's all happened over the space of this kind of last decade. And like, I always talk to everybody about how those different kind of phases have been received, and everybody has their own unique perspective. But
Yeah.
I'd love for you to kind of talk about like kind of what all that looked like as a born raised Detroiter from your perspective.
Oh no.
No,
um.
you don't have to throw any shade or anything. It's just like
No, I like. How
just
was I? There's there's something about being younger and having a disdain watching a system happen that you're not a part of, even though you've been a part of a scene, right? But then there's also the idea of not understanding the strength of a portfolio, right? So
yeah,
sometimes
I
you
get.
get part of the system to get more out of a system that you're not getting something from.
Mm,
So like I wasn't invited to any of the mural stuff, but also I'd never painted a mural, right? I was like I assisted people, but no one knew I assisted people until people knew I assisted people.
mm,
And like I don't know, I was just upset, and then I wasn't because I'm like, this is mostly my fault that I'm not getting invited to something. Um, until I was, and then still watching it be unbalanced as far as who gets what. I think Detroit is always at the forefront, but also sometimes lagging on some stuff. It's a weird dichotomy, and I don't know. Being vocal is part of the thing, but also not staying local is part of the thing.
yeah,
So
yeah. I feel like, because I grew up obviously in one of the most geographically isolated nations on the planet. It's like
yeah,
literally an island nation at the, bottom of the South Pacific. Our closest neighbors are, our closest largest neighbors are basically Australia and Antarctica,
yeah,
so it's kind of like a thing. Um, a lot of people didn't really come there.
mhm,
Like, for example, I'll just use the example of like, touring musicians,
yeah,
like US acts, like the acts that we liked in the 90s and stuff, didn't come there unless they were booked for a nationwide tour of Australia, and then a local promoter could kind of jump on that and kind of
yeah,
bring them over. And, when I was about 20 or 21 years old, like I really, really wanted to organize like a graffiti festival, like a jam, like kind of, they were like the proto to like kind of like what became the mural festival, and thought about bringing artists kind of out there. And there was a certain amount of resentment, because all sorts of artists kind of came out of the woodwork and were like, why was I not invited? Why couldn't I participate? And they would have been, quite often somebody that was very valid. Like, there was
mhm,
definitely room for them to be there. Like, they definitely had contributed to the history and stuff like that. But what I was trying to do was kind of curate a balance between those people, the young, up and coming and active people, and then these overseas people, to get this exchange of knowledge going on.
yeah,
And, a lot happens from when outside knowledge comes in, but the outsiders need a lot of guidance too, like about the lay of the land and like how to operate, like, you know what I mean? And it's kind of like, it's cool because sometimes it's like things take off exponentially, through that exchange, you
yeah,
know. And I certainly saw that, like happening with Detroit. Like I definitely think that there were kind of little bits of information that were being exchanged from like outside artists to local artists that I would definitely see applied. Like I wouldn't say it was a complete write off. You know what I mean? Like there were definitely a lot of positives.
I can't argue with that. Like, I don't know. When you just feel left out, you feel left out. Like, feelings happen. But at the same time, there's always going to be someone left out, right? But then what do you do about being left out? Do you figure out how to be involved? Or you just stay upset and figure it out? But sometimes it's systems that are in the way of that, and that's a whole other thing.
Absolutely. Well, like when I posted the first one of these discussions, which was with Vizzy, there was a comment left from somebody that said that they had felt like they were trying to get into the mural scene and felt like it was being gatekept and that there was no easy kind of access. And they sort of blamed the artists. Like they kind of said that the artists were gatekeeping and not allowing other artists in, which I found quite interesting, and I did make a comment back where I said, well, when I started doing big walls and I wanted to do that, like I decided that was something I was interested in doing, nobody was inviting me or giving me opportunities. I just kind of did some, kind of off of my own back, like I kind of funded them myself or pulled together resources. And some of them were done over weeks and months, because it wasn't like a festival kind of context, where everyone's just sort of laid it out to me, giving me all the tools I need or whatever. I reckon it didn't take that many, like before people kind of saw what I was putting out there, like, and I started to get invitations, and I think, like the strength of having a good folio is really important. I think more has to be said about having a folio that you've done on your own terms so that the invites you get are invites you want.
Yeah, that's probably the more important part. Like, not like being invited to do something that you don't want to do is the worst because then you also have to do it, and then I don't know. But I think I'm not gonna say lucky, but I got to the point where I advocated enough, and I was invited to be a resident artist for City Walls in Detroit, and they wanted us to paint too many walls, and then we negotiated it down, but during that residency, I think I did 8 murals, and those 8 murals is what is the bulk of my like early portfolio, so I can go do more stuff and heighten my visual language community wise. You know what I mean? Like, public facing.
I think like I equate it to like tattoo artists a lot because like the really smart tattoo artists that I've met over the years that are kind of really kind of in demand or whatever are people that while they were apprenticing and stuff, they were drawing their own flash at nighttime outside of the hours and like really honing that so that then eventually people would ask for that instead of like, I don't know, like a cursive script of their daughter's name or something.
Yeah, dude. Like with tattooing, like you make your own flash, you have your own style if you work on that, if that's the kind of tattoo artist that you are. But then your first and best practice implementing person thing is you. So like I have tattoos all over my legs and my arms because I had to do them. I need to know what it felt like to put needle in skin. And the same goes for painting a giant wall and pretty much everything, I think.
Absolutely. So we talked the other day about, the prospect of getting out of Detroit and kind of getting out into the world and kind of experiencing some different places, and hopefully that's something we've started to kind of implement and make happen. What, like, have you traveled outside of Detroit, like to paint a large mural yet, or have they all been concentrated there?
I've painted some outside of Detroit. The ones that are my own, or actually, there was a collaborative one at Crush Walls, and it was I think, just Max, Sansine, Hyro, Sydney, and me. So 5 of us on that wall. And then
that's a good team.
It is. It was a very interesting how we had to get on that one. Anyway,
I can imagine, but
button heads, it was great. But like, what was another one? Oh, St. Petersburg, Florida, did one down there for Shine Mural
oh yeah,
Festival.
you did Shine Festival.
Yeah, that one was great. That one changed my life. Um, I think those are the only two I can think of that are outside of Detroit that are my own. Yeah, but
So
I've
where's
been.
your where would be
Go ahead.
your like dream location?
I don't know. Um, that's a hard because like I could see the benefit of going really anywhere, and if it's art forward, I feel safer getting most places than if
Mm,
it were just me moving about the world because I have a very interesting identity that a lot of people don't really jive with. So if it's an art focused like endeavor, then there's at
mm,
least people looking out for me. And
yeah.
I don't know, I could make something cool. So
I mean,
that's
that's
non
always the dream. That's always the dream.
yeah, that's my
I
non
think.
answer.
Oh no, it's a good answer. I think, like, honestly, like, I think that travel is just kind of one of the most valuable things, for an artist to do. Artists are, by nature very observant,
Hmm.
and very curious and very interested in, the exchange of kind of culture and ideas, and sometimes it can be very jarring. You know what I mean? Like, I've been to some weird places through this journey. Like, I've been to some countries that are technically like authoritarian, and like really like places that are really politically insular,
Yeah,
and really closed, and like had to kind of navigate that. And it's weird, it's weird, but it's informed me, even if it's informed me in a way of like told me what I don't like in the world.
yeah,
You know what I mean?
yeah,
Which is important too.
definitely. Like, I mean, I've traveled. And when I travel, I like to be invisible, you know? So I went to Japan and just slept on the streets for 4 days and just went to as many things as I could without spending too much money because that's always a challenge that I put in front of whatever travel endeavor I do just to see how much things I can do. Um, and that was, I don't know, very enlightening. Like,
Mm,
especially going to museums and seeing how clean everything was, the streets and
yeah.
stuff. It's like, that's fascinating. The psychology of, you know,
Well,
cleanliness.
you realize very quickly that infrastructure is not something that's very well invested in the US, compared to other places.
Like, you get off a plane and you get on a train and you're anywhere.
Mm,
But, like, Detroit, even, I, I couldn't tell you what our public transit is doing right now. I know they're trying. And
mm,
that's something. I used to be a person who took 3 buses to get to work and wanted to get a car as soon as I could because 3 hour commute to work
mm.
5 hours is an 8 hour day. You
Yeah.
know what I mean? That's and I'm not getting paid for those 3 hours. So like,
No.
yeah, infrastructure is very important, and when you
I
get to
think even
experience
worse, I've seen people waiting for the bus in Detroit and it just doesn't show up.
show up,
and
like
and they're like visibly pissed and like will tell you like I have to get to work and the bus just didn't bother to show today, and that's my whole day messed up. Now I'm walking. It's like, damn, that sucks.
it does, especially when it's snowing outside.
Oh my god, so brutal, man. But it's such a car city, like being that it's this kind of center of like the automotive industry.
Yeah,
Everything's kind of designed around that concept. Like even the width of the roads, like the main arterial routes. I mean, some of those are like eight lanes wide. Like jaywalking across the street in Detroit. They definitely don't slow down for you like they do in like kind of more pedestrian friendly cities too.
they started doing pedestrian only spaces, and I think they're cool or whatever. But there's so much construction that no one can walk through it, so it doesn't even. Maybe it's a future thing that's done now, but it's very fascinating to watch how
Yeah.
car-centered Detroit is trying to shift and change with the times.
Hmm. I think it's a really hard thing to do retroactively. Like I sort of feel like watching my city back home kind of go through that of trying to
Mhm.
build like underground train systems and stuff like years and years and years after that discussion was sort of had and they
Yeah,
opted in favor of cars, and now they're like, oh, hang on, this isn't sustainable. We've got like, a couple million people or one person per car driving around, and it's like gridlock at certain times of the day and it's not great for the environment. I mean, we kind of pull out the per capita thing a lot. The claim that we're like the worst at everything per capita because we are such a small place, so we get to do that. But it has to be said that for a country like the size of New Zealand, like its footprint is very disproportionate to its size. You know what I mean? Because of it, them making decisions in the late 50s, not to build a subway. You know?
I mean, I do know that the same thing
Yeah.
happened, right?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think the interesting thing to me about Detroit, I mean, one of the many interesting things about Detroit, like it's always been a very fascinating place to me, but um, it's um, it's a very American city, like in the sense that I think that it's like so much of the history of that city encapsulates the history of America.
Yeah, yeah,
And all of the kind of dynamics and everything, like the aspirational side of it, the disappointing side of it, the kind of the neglect and disregard for, investing in infrastructure and systems that are for the public good.
yeah.
But then the amazing kind of sense of optimism
It's
that exists there as well.
it's a great little mix. Us
It,
Detroiters. Yeah, we
yeah, I
have all.
remember seeing pheasants walking down the street and being like, whoa, and seeing trees that had grown out the roofs of buildings and being in awe, the sort of way that like nature kind of just claims back space very quickly. And,
Yeah,
I'd say to someone, oh, wow, that must have been abandoned for like 100 years. And I'm like, no, I remember that building being a functioning building just 20 years ago. You know what I mean?
yeah.
So that happens quicker than you think. Or having deer run past me while I was painting freights, is kind of like an interesting thing, but it's like, it's sort of magical, like it's kind of a place that has asked me to kind of stop and reflect on a lot of things many times and question what I think I know.
Yeah. I mean, all the wildlife of it all. I live in the countryside of the city of Detroit. Like I'm in the middle of nowhere and I see pheasants, coyotes, possums, right? Like everything. I see it all. And I also see them demolishing houses like every 2 weeks. And then I also see a plant expanding so that there's more manufacturing happening, but then there's also more pollution. And then there's
Mm.
also more people who have jobs. So it's like always a weird balance. And then
Mm.
watching it happen is also interesting.
Yeah,
Uh,
absolutely. I think one of the other things that really fascinated me, like about Detroit, were kind of these sort of what would you call them? They're kind of like guerrilla, sort of large scale installations that are made with recycled materials, like Tyree Guyton's Heidelberg project or Dabble's. Like Dabble's, the stone
Museum?
teaching. Yeah, his at the Bead Museum, but he's got that one. What's it titled? It's like iron teaching stone how to rust. It's like a classroom
Yeah,
with like
yeah, yeah.
chairs with rocks all sitting, and there's like a rusted kind of figure made of old kind of iron, like teaching a classroom full of rocks. And I just thought, man, that's real cool. But you would never see that in any other city.
Nah, I mean, no, not a city. It would be in
No,
like rural area or like deserted areas outside of a city. Yeah, that's true. You're right.
yeah, but it's quite a profound work.
Yeah, I
Like,
mean, all of it is because it's simultaneously commenting on what's happening in the city and also using the tools of what's left behind from the city. And then at a certain point, like like the idea of, what's the word, longevity, getting to the point of what you need the thing to be, I guess. Like,
Mm.
at first it was considered trash. I guess some people consider it trash still. And now it's like fine art. You know what I mean? Like the trajectory of that, and they're being spoken about in classrooms.
Mm.
Yeah. It's
I felt like coming to Detroit, like all these times and interacting with these artists, it made me really want to rethink what I was doing. Like I
ooh,
was just kind of like, well, why am I even offering anything valid into the conversation here? Like because, and you realize it's a very different kind of life. Although I, d- I do remember there was a tour that we did on one of the 1X Run like festival things where
yeah,
we went to the Heidelberg project. And
yeah.
Tyree Guyton came out and he started his presentation with, he goes, "What's 1 plus 1?" And everybody says 2, and he goes, "1 plus 1 equals 4." And then a friend of ours, who I won't name right now, said, "Somebody obviously flunked math," which I think you could probably guess who that was.
No, I know you do.
But he was the quintessential kind of cryptic kind of art guy. You know what I mean? Like, and I had tried to interact with him a few times. Like, he was out there kind of with his weed whacker, like kind of just maintaining the grounds and stuff, and he just kind of seemed a little like annoyed. And I came up with a million questions, but still, I think what he's made is really amazing.
Yeah, yeah. All those things can be true.
I mean, I feel like the thing
Questions.
about a place, I feel like, like Detroit is an island in a way.
It is.
It kind of exists in its own space. You know what I mean? And I kind of I can relate that once again back to where I come from.
Yeah.
I think it's a space that incubates some of the greatest talent in the world.
Hmm.
You know what I mean? And I guess the question is always the same question that me and my peers kind of have always grappled with. It's like, how do you get the very best out of that, all the energy and all those kind of elements that nurture this creativity and still thrive? Like,
Yeah.
get out and thrive. Like, what is the secret to doing that? You know?
Yeah. 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 But before we continue and answer a question I don't know the answer to, do you feel like after coming to Detroit so many times, what of about your art changed or was like, yeah, influenced by
Detroit always taught me to embrace complexity, that some of the more simplistic kind of narratives that we hear or tell ourselves, or are sort of propagated sometimes, that there's like a million more layers to each of those kind of stories.
Yeah.
It taught me that like communities, that there's multiple communities that exist within a community, and each of them have their own kind of particular struggles and set of things and perspectives that they're kind of dealing with. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? So
Yeah.
it's not good to kind of blanket anything. Um, Man, Detroit taught me a lot. Like, man, I could keep going. Like Detroit, um, Detroit definitely taught me a lot about optimism. I sort of said that earlier, but like I saw a lot of people that kind of had an ability to imagine different kind of outcomes and futures,
Yeah.
and a lot of initiative takers, like people just kind of just doing things out of their own pocket, you know, because they
Very deep.
believe in them, and not really like making a lot of money out of them or anything, but just doing them.
Yeah.
And that just, when I say it, made me rethink what I was doing as an artist. It sort of made me realize that that's always been at the heart of anything good for me. Like when I first started doing the types of things that I do, like the graffiti or the festival or a gallery or murals or whatever,
Mhm.
I did them because I believed in them. I did them because I felt that on some level there was something necessary about those things and having those things happen, in
Yeah.
the world.
Yeah.
And I did them not really ever for any type of real monetary gain. Um, I did them, I think what happened was eventually I made enough money doing things to just invest and keep doing things.
Yeah.
And that's kind of enough. Like, that's all I've ever wanted,
Yeah.
you know? Detroit reaffirmed that for me, that that's right, that that's the right path, you know?
Like the complexity and the necessity to do what's best for what like feeds your creative soul type of thing.
And feeds
Instead
others. And because art is a conversation, and creativity in all its shapes and forms of the conversation, like understanding that it needs many inputs,
Mhm.
that all are going to interact and feed off of each other. And it's only going to happen if you believe in it, if you invest the time and energy and believe it should happen. Like, otherwise, it just won't happen,
Right.
Or it
Yeah.
will happen without you, and you'll just miss it, and your life will be so much less enriched for that.
Yeah. That's just true. Unless your art
Yeah,
is an echo chamber, I guess. But
yeah,
I,
yeah, yeah. But I think that's why I like public art as well. You
yep.
know, because just I don't know. There's a type of openness that's nurtured, when you're just out and exposed that way. Like where you are just suddenly kind of dealing with it, like, because I definitely dealt with a ton of negativity, not just as a graffiti artist, which was like an incredibly hostile kind of existence.
Yeah.
Everything about it, like public hated it, other graffiti writers hate you, the authorities hate you, you know what I mean? And it's kind of like a
Yeah.
thing, that's the dynamics of it. But you know what that is. But then when you go out and you're painting public murals and you upset somebody and they're like, really, really kind of like upset, on some deep kind of visceral level that you have no control over really, and they
Yeah.
come up and express that to you, and in your mind you've really built this up like, oh, I'm doing something so good and so positive, like I'm not doing the graffiti thing here, I'm doing something that like where I've engaged with a ton of people and try to be sensitive to the issues on the ground, and I've still upset someone.
Yeah.
That's a really jarring experience, you know what I mean? It's like you get hit with that and you're just like, oh whoa, but that's kind of also part of the beauty of it.
Yeah. I mean, like I said before, it can't please everyone, right?
No.
But the as beautiful as it is, it's also scary because
Yeah.
it's like you're
Yeah.
vulnerable. You're just out there, and everyone knows where you're about to be for the next like 4 days. So
Yeah.
it's more scary. But like
Yeah.
the the perspective expanding nature of public art is
Mm.
I think, very important.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's like, I think like, I don't feel like I have a lot of power to kind of improve or change, a lot in the world,
Mhm.
but that's kind of like the mode that I guess I chose, like, it's like, well, like I can do this, like I can do it. And for the most part, it's a good thing. And kind of, it might be something as simple as like just brightening, just putting a splash of color to brighten someone's day. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like just, but I think even more so, like the thing that I love is like when young people in particular feel the spark of inspiration, like what I felt as a young person when I saw art outside, like where it looked like it was done by like some kind of alchemist, someone had just pulled all these weird, random raw materials together and reconfigured them into something like that was like of beauty. And I spent a lot of time standing in front of walls as a kid trying to decipher like how people did what they did. And the day that a friend told me, oh, you'll finally achieve that, like I saw one of your walls and I just stood there trying to work out how the hell you did it. Like that's probably the most gratifying thing I ever experienced.
Hell yeah. Or like you say that you're not gonna change the world or whatever, but if you think about it in terms of like butterfly effect and
Mm,
cause and effect of how you painted a mural and someone who you don't know you're influencing can be the one to change something for the better, That's that power right there. And even if that comes 10 years down the line because someone saw your work and stood in front of it and changed their mind about something or expanded how they thought about a problem that they didn't know the solution to, that's primo.
I agree. Yeah. I mean, I think that's why we do it, right?
That's exactly why we do it.
Awesome.